the DPP, or the state, has been dismissed. Their appeal was thrown out of the courts, and their appeal was dismissed by the Court of Appeal in Ireland, which is good. It's a start. But two things have happened that haven't been completed, and this is very problematic. There was entered into the High Court of Ireland a request to test the constitutionality of section 11, I think it was 5 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006. And they said they were going to test the constitutionality of these sections, which, by the way, would also call into question 113 and 114 of the same Act. They said they were going to test these sections. They even scheduled it. They started the process. The court was in order. This was in the schedule, so to do, to test the constitutionality of those sections I mentioned to you just now. The judge concluded that I should have the convictions that were brought against me quashed. They did that. But then they said it remains an open question as to whether those sections that I've mentioned were constitutional or not, which was them basically admitting that they hadn't tested them. And they said in their conclusion that it remains an open question as to whether they're constitutional or not. They gave no reason why. They said that there was and should be a testing of those sections, but that there would be an appropriate case to do so. And I kind of thought to myself, what more appropriate case is there? You have somebody here in front of you who's being brought before the court, and they're trying to convict him through these sections. What more appropriate case would there possibly be? But the point is this, that the courts have said we should test these sections, and they haven't. They haven't brought them to their conclusion. They haven't tested them. And so even to this day, they're still talking about the constitutionality of the sections and not testing them. Even in the most recent conclusion of the High Court, the Court of Appeal in Ireland, just today, you can check it out on courts.ie, Stephen Tallon versus the DPP. Even in the conclusion of the court, they mentioned the constitutionality of those sections. It's still being mentioned. They're saying we don't want to comment on the constitutionality of those sections, but you keep talking about the constitutionality of those sections. Where are they being tested? Yeah, we should test the constitutionality of those sections before we proceed in the circuit court. Yes, we should. Case adjourned. By the way, they have a surety belonging to me of €1,500 and haven't mentioned anything to me about giving it back to me. It was put down to get me out of prison. They put me in prison for a month. This has been going on for years. I was under duress of being thrown in prison for years. And they want to give me €150 and say, we'll cover your costs for the day up in Dublin. And no sign of any other sorts of compensation for their wrongs, even though they've admitted point blank that they're wrong. So two things are not being done. The testing of the constitutionality of those sections or compensation. Why are they not compensating me? They want to give me €150. For what? It doesn't cost €150 to get up to Dublin. And a sandwich, are they going to pay for my sandwich? It doesn't cost €150. Why are they giving me €150? For what? I represented myself. I don't have to pay a solicitor. If you're covering my costs, you give me my bus fare. 150 is too much. For that alone. But are they kind of telling me this is some kind of compensation, Mr. Tallon, for putting you out on the day? What about the years I've been put out for? What about the imprisonments? What about my name in the newspapers? What about being brought through the civil court, the district court? What about my name being brought through the mud? What about my difficulty getting a job in the town? What about the words homophobic and racist being used attached to my name? What about the circuit court appeal that I had to go through? What about the High Court taking years to go through the case, and always the apprehension and trepidation that I might end up in jail looming over my head for years on end? What about appeals being accepted out of date? What about my people claiming to be my counsel, failing to pass on information to me, and then the courts using them as a go-between even after I dismissed them in the courts? And the court knew that, and they still use them to communicate with me. What about all of these violations of my rights, privacies and wishes? And nothing has been offered me in compensation, while it is the role of the court, the state, it's incumbent upon them to actually issue the compensation. It's not plenary proceedings. I'm not claiming damages that they don't know about, that we need to explore together. They know exactly how I've been harmed. It's all on record. They know exactly what I've been put through. It's all on record. They don't need me to fill them in on it. Now, like psychological damage, how would they quantify that? So I ask you, whilst it is the state's responsibility to compensate me for all of the harm that has come against my life from the very moment that the judge ruled against me, and all in terms of the civil order, all of the, not just that, but everything they did to me in terms of members of Garda Síochána coming up to me and giving me adult behaviour warnings and all of that kind of stuff, that's all proven to have been inappropriate conduct. Because they've said the civil order couldn't stand. Well, if the civil order couldn't stand, summoning me to court was done unlawfully. Therefore, the sections that they did it under are unconstitutional. Yet they're still claiming that they're not testing the constitutionality or talking about it or anything while they're talking about it. I mean, you have to talk about the constitutionality of that section to mention that you're not going to be talking about it. So it's already in the discussion. Do you get what I'm saying? It's already been brought to the table. Are those sections constitutional or not? And why are courts saying, by the way, on the constitutionality of those matters, we're not going to comment? But you're already talking about the constitutionality of those matters. Therefore, it must be resolved. It has to be solved. The mystery of the constitutionality of those sections. It was scheduled in the High Court of Ireland. They have to do it. They're now lawfully obligated to do it. And they're still talking about it. How many court conclusions has it been in? The High Court conclusion it's been in. It's been in now as Court of Appeal conclusion, and they still haven't done it? Why not? That's very suspicious behaviour. Why are they constantly mentioning the constitutionality of those sections, but they're not testing them? That's suspicious behaviour. If they know that it's a question as to whether they're constitutional or not, and I know they're not constitutional, and I know that it's been ruled in the High Court that they're not indirectly, because guards can't prosecute in court, and these sections that I'm talking about ask them to and tell them that they can. So we already know that they're unconstitutional. They're just running away from testing them in a court of law, while they're still talking about them in the conclusions of the courts. This is not normal behaviour. It's not rational or logical thinking. The constitutionality of sections 113, 114, 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006 must be tested by law, because the High Court of Ireland have submitted that they should be. Why are we still having this conversation that we're not having about the constitutionality of sections 115, 117 and therefore 113, 114? The reason I say that naturally and automatically 113 and 114 will be tested, because they give definition and context to 115 and 117. You wouldn't be testing 115 and 117 without testing 113 and 114. You couldn't, sure. You couldn't have context or meaning or definition. So Why aren't they doing it? Imagine me saying to you, I'm not going to have a conversation with you about the colour on the wall there. But we're already talking about the colour on the wall because you just mentioned it. Oh yeah, so we are having a conversation about the colour of the wall. Yeah, I suppose we are. As soon as the court mentions the constitutionality of a section, they have to test it because they've already brought it into the conversation. It's already been discussed. You can't avoid discussing it while you're discussing it. So it's suspicious that they're discussing the constitutionality of those sections without concluding as to whether they are constitutional or not. The fact that they haven't conclusively tested them is very suspicious behaviour. Can you imagine a guard coming to you and saying, yes, we have heard tell that somebody might have broken into that house over there. Oh, have you, guard? Okay. It's now come to your attention that somebody might have broken into that house over there. We're talking about it and you're not checking it out. Why is that? Why is that, guard? You see the point? Guard, we've just spoken about this house maybe across the road not being above board. You just talked to me about it. And you're telling me that you're not going to go and check it out, whether it's been broken into or not? That's not acceptable. When the Court of Appeal says to you, this issue about the constitutionality of these sections, we're not going to really comment on that. Why did you mention it then? Why do you keep mentioning the constitutionality of these sections and not testing them? That's very, very suspicious. Why are you running away from testing the constitutionality of those sections? That's crazy behaviour. We've heard that there's a killer on the loose, but certainly we won't be investigating that, okay? And I don't want to comment on it at this time. When's going to be a good time to test the constitutionality of sections that's come to your knowledge might be unconstitutional? Should we put that on the long finger while more people end up in court on account of those sections? Suspicious. Far beyond suspicious, it's highly unlawful now. Because what they're doing is they're telling us that there is doubt around those sections while they sit on their hands and do nothing about that doubt. That tells us something is untoward. Something is conspiratorial, because more than one court now has said we're not going to have the conversation we're sort of having already. That's wrong. We're not going to have a conversation we're already having. What do you mean we're already having it if we're not going to have it? Because you're talking about not having it. Therefore, you're already having it. I don't want to have a conversation about your blonde hair. Well, we already are having a conversation about your blonde hair. Because I just said we're not going to have a conversation about your blonde hair. We've already started talking about it. You can't have a conversation about the blonde hair and not have it at the same time. And it's very suspicious if you're saying we're not going to have a conversation about your blonde hair. Do you see the point I'm making to you? It has come to the knowledge of those who should be testing those constitutionality, or the constitutionality of those sections. Well, why aren't they? Well, they said they were. They scheduled them in the court. Well, why didn't they? Well, they didn't give us any reason. But they said that it remains an open question and that there would be an appropriate case to do that. Well, when is this appropriate case? They haven't said. Well, why haven't they told us when the appropriate time for the case will be? They just haven't. And they said they don't want to comment on it. Well, why? I don't want to have a conversation about your blonde hair, Susie. Well, you already are, because you mentioned it. Do you see the point? It's very different when you talk about the constitutionality, because the fact that it might come even to the mind of a judge or a barrister at law or the state that the constitutionality of sections needs to be tested, and they don't, that's verging on treason. because they know that there might be something in the that is going against the rights of an Irish person. So supporting that is treason. Therefore, failing to do it is verging on treason, because it's come to their knowledge that they should test them. And I've given them ample information on it. In terms of, even the High Court of Ireland have even recently tested whether a member of An Garda Síochána should be allowed to prosecute in court or not. Do you know what they ruled? They're not allowed. Do you know what 113 and 114 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006 say? Guards are allowed to prosecute in court. Well, we know that they're not. The High Court have said that they're not. Well, why aren't they doing it? Why aren't they just removing them? Why aren't they just removing those sections now? Remove them already. That's not complicated. Guards aren't allowed to prosecute in court. Those sections say that they should and can. Oh, remove them quick. That's not big work. That's not very difficult. You don't have to be a lawyer or a barrister at law. This should be cut and dry. This should be black and white. This should be easy peasy lemon squeezy for them men who should know the law inside and out and be able to interpret it rightly like that. They paid very big money for the study they did, for passing the bar. Very big money. Far more than €150. Mr. Talon represented himself. We want to give him €150 for the day. How much do you think the court judges got? How much do you think that the state solicitor got? The one who lied about me? Or the state barrister? How much do you think the state got that day? Everybody, all the members of staff involved. Do you think they only got 150 quid for their day? But what was the 150 quid for? That more than covered my bus fare. And even a sandwich, but I don't eat sandwiches. See the point? So what were they giving me €150 for? Maybe 150,000 would be closer to what they should be giving me. Given that they gave me a civil order that saw me not being allowed to engage my freedoms for 2 years, and they found that civil order was unlawfully given. And I was under threat of imprisonment, and I spent a month in prison on account of that civil order that they've said doesn't stand. What about €150,000 instead of 150? But it's not my responsibility to issue plenary proceedings. That would cost me more money. It's not reasonable to think that it should cost me more money to get the money that the state should give me. That would be madness. No, it's incumbent upon the state to motion for that compensation. Why? Because it's the responsibility of the state to do it by default, automatically. So where's this €150 for? What's that for? That's like a slap in the face with a wet fish. That's worse than giving me nothing. But it's better than giving me nothing in one way, because they've admitted that I should be given something. So if I should be given something, why is it only €150? Do they think that they can throw their weight around, misapply civil orders, put people in prison, and it doesn't cost them more than €150? Why aren't the judges jumping to my defence? It's their job to reinstate me and to calculate what I've lost as a result of the civil order and everything that came out of it. Do you think that how much money do you think spending a month in prison when you're innocent is worth? How much money do you think 2 years of not being allowed to do your job, your work, is worth? My ministry, that is. How much do you think I should be paid for that? Compensated. What about my name in the newspaper? What about my name being muck in the community because they're calling me a racist homophobe? None of that has been founded or substantiated. Now that was the local newspaper, albeit, but it was allowed to be submitted in court, and that's the only reason it ended up in the newspaper. So the judge should have said, if you cannot back up that Mr. Tallon is homophobic, you'll have to retract your statement and it cannot be recorded or used. That's what he should have said, because it has the ability to defame Mr. Tallon's character, and this is an unfounded statement. It's not substantiated with solid irrefutable evidence. It remains prima facie, and you haven't backed it up with any evidence. So this very, very serious accusation against his character must be retracted unless you have some evidence to submit to support it. So that's not proper conduct. That's not proper behaviour in the court. This is misconduct. So all of that damage that's been done to me, I apply for a job now. I'm known as the preacher. Dismissed. The preacher guy. I apply for a job. Do you think they're going to want me front of house after being called a racist homophobe in the local newspaper? Am I going to get a counter job somewhere? Hi, I'm the racist homophobe from the bull ring there. Do you know the guy that was in the newspaper? Yeah, really good for your brand. Why don't you hire me? It doesn't work like that, does it? So they know that harm has been done to my life as a result of this. They have to reinstate my good name. That's a lawful term now. They have to reinstate my good name. They have to compensate me for all of the harm that came against my life as a result of the civil order, because they've ruled the civil order was unlawfully given. That's gone on for years, guys. Years. It's affected all of my family. It's affected my relationships with my family. It's affected my relationships in the community. It's affected me in ways that I can't describe to you. And they want to hand me €150 and no other mention of compensation, when it is the state's responsibility, their constitutional responsibility, to compensate me for the errors that are inherent in the conduct of the state. So, when are they going to do it? When are they going to start doing it? They haven't even given me back the €1,500 surety that was put down to get me out of prison on bail. That was given to mainland prison to release me as a surety. No mention of that. Why didn't I get that back? No mention of it in the court. So the state, it's now incumbent upon the state to motion for compensating me. It's not up to me to motion for it, because it's not my responsibility. It's the state's responsibility to compensate. Do you understand? So it's not my responsibility to do it. Why should, because think about it logically, why should it cost me more money to get compensation? I'd have to employ a solicitor. I'd have to go about plenary proceedings. That's not what this is. I'm not suing them for tripping over the curb. They know that my life has been harmed in a measurable way, because it's all been reported on. It's all in the file, on my file. It's all been through the courts. It's available on digital audio recording, what has happened to me. They know the history of the case. They know everything that's come against me as a result of the civil order. So it's not as though they're in the dark around these issues. So why haven't they motioned to compensate me? €150. For what? For what? They accepted an appeal against me a month and 4 days late. They didn't even establish jurisdiction. They want to throw €150 at me. For what? It's totally out of order. The constitutionality of these, of section 115, 117, 113, 114 also needs to be tested. You need to test the constitutionality of that. It already has indirectly in the High Court, so the effects of that ruling need to extend to the Criminal Justice Act 2006 in its parts. they're still having a conversation about not having a conversation about the constitutionality of those sections. It doesn't get much more ridiculous than that. We'll talk about what we're not going to talk about, and then we won't talk about it. I mean, that's ridiculous. The High Court needs to test the constitutionality of those sections. They already have the media of the Criminal Justice Act 2006. So blessings in Jesus' name, another victory. Today, the state were dismissed in their appeal against the quashing of convictions that were said to be established against me. And I won't be going to prison, none of that. It's finished. They have to test now the constitutionality of those sections, and they have to motion to compensate me for the harm done to my life as a result of all of this that I've been dragged through. And if they don't, then we're in serious territory, because they have knowledge that they should. We're already in serious territory surrounding the constitutionality of those sections, but if they now refuse to follow through on the testing of those sections, and they refuse to follow through on compensating me for harm they know that has been done to my life as a result of a civil order they deemed unlawful, then now they're deliberately running and avoiding compensating me and avoiding testing the constitutionality of those sections. That can't be permitted. That's impermissible. They have to do their job properly and thoroughly. Blessings in Jesus' name. Amen. Victory is ours for the saints of God. Israel triumphant in God. Blessings.